Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. This is Alex Medina, Sales and Business Development at DDS CAD. Before we begin, just want to go over some logistics. Next slide, right? All attendees will be muted during the presentation. Make sure to send us your questions via the chat box. The webcast will be recorded for future viewing, and we do have Bluebeam training available. Make sure to contact us if you have any more information. Or if you want any more information. You could reach us at 305-445-6480 or email us at info@ddscad.com. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to our Bluebeam technical specialist, Ari Rejtman.
Thank you, Alex. Hey, everybody. My name is Ari. I'm a Bluebeam certified instructor with Digital Drafting Systems. Hope you've all been doing well in this new year. And today, we're going to be doing a sort of new setup experience. We're going to see what it's like to set up Revu for success. We're going to optimize our preferences, make our interface the best that it can be, and get our tool chest ready to supplement our workflow. So, like I said, we're going to be looking at those things, and within them, we're going to be delving into profiles and preferences, creating toolbars and managing our settings, and using the tool chest to the best of its ability. Without further ado, let's switch right into Bluebeam Revu. So I have Revu open, and this is what it's going to look like when you have everything set up the way you want. I have Revu set up in a customized way. My profile is set up in a certain way. I have certain functions split on the left and the right here, and I have toolbars turned on at the top. I actually have every single toolbar turned on at the top. And I'm going to show you a few ways that you can optimize viewing space or just have all the buttons that you'll need for your workflow. And we can do a combination of both at the same time. So when you first start Revu is going to look basically different from this. I'm going to go to the Revu dropdown, mouse over profiles, and click on the Revu profile. This is the default profile. So when you start a Revu, it's going to look basically just like this. There are a few issues with this profile. So we have a lot of special functions in Revu, and they can be found here in our left panel. For example, file access is a great way to manage our files. We can go to thumbnails and see different pages in Revu. And we can go to our tool chest and have a group of all of our tools, customize them the way we want, and we can find tools that are available online and some that come with the program, such as these architecture, contractor, and engineer review tools. These are all great. Now I'm going to go to properties, and I'm going to introduce our first problem. Here in properties, I can see some generic information about my file that I have currently open if I want to. But if I click on a markup, that changes. And now I can see information about the markup. And I can start to modify different settings in our markup. This is really important because I want to make sure that my markups look a certain way and are used in specific ways according to my discipline and my workflow. So if I was an architect, more than likely they'd be red. If I was an engineer, maybe they'd be yellow or blue, depending on what I'm doing and who I'm working with. Color-coded stuff is important. The problem is that if I have a tool in my tool chest and I want to change its properties, for example, if I click on the tool, now it's activated, I can't do that. And the reason why is because in the properties area, I can do it, but I cannot view the tool chest and properties at the same time. This is a bit of a problem. So I'd have to switch to either tab in order to modify the properties, and that takes a little bit too much time. So instead, it would be better if we could have properties open on the right side and our tool chest open on the left side. On the right side right now, we have some shortcuts to basic functions in Revu, such as the highlighter tool, the pen tool. We can even use the snapshot and insert image tool very quickly here. We have access to our stamps from this module right here, and these are great. But it would be a little bit better if we used some of the space that we have at the top. Right now, we have this entire blank line. This line is actually used and changes when we click on a markup. So you can see here that this line now is showing some basic properties about a markup, and I can actually change a markup's properties right up here instead of going to properties. But there is a certain amount of overlap and a certain amount of things that are not available in either area. So properties has all of the properties, and this area up here has some of the properties, but not all of them. Some markups, luckily enough, that have text do have some special buttons up here that are not available in properties, such as the auto size text box button, which is found right here, and the opposite of that, the auto size text. So instead of fitting the box around your text, it actually makes your text bigger so it can fit inside of a box. I'll demonstrate that a little bit later. So we need to change our profile in order to get the best of both worlds. So what we want to do is we're going to go to the Revu dropdown. mouse over profile, and let's just cycle through to the next one, Review Advanced. I love this profile, and my profile that I made is a copy of this profile. And the reason why is because it basically understands the need for having our tool chest and properties open at the same time. They're actually currently open right now to demonstrate this. So now that I have them both open, and if I click on any of these tools here in my tool chest, I can now modify their properties while still keeping the tool chest open at the same time. So Review Advanced is a great profile, and I urge you all to try it out. But don't make too many changes to it if you want to keep its default state, and instead activate the profile first. So there's a check next to the profile, and it's currently activated on my screen. And then we need to make a copy of it. So we're going to go to the Profiles area and click on Manage Profiles. And then we can select it in the group. We don't have to, but it's good to do that just in case, because all you need is to have the profile open in your background. And then when you click on Add, it's going to make a copy of the current profile that's highlighted. So we can call this one Presentation Profile just for today. And then we can click OK. So basically, my screen flashed, my profile is now ready to go. I can click OK here. By the way, just so you all know, you can import and export profiles. So everything that we're doing today only needs to be done once by all of us individually if we have certain preferences. But if I wanted to, I could export my profile. It becomes a small little file, this .bpx file, and I can send it to anybody I want via email, put it on a USB drive. It's a very small file, so it'll fit the 20 megabyte plus requirements for certain emails. And the import button is right here. I can click on it and I can locate that file if I wanted to. So let's click on OK. And let's go back to the review dropdown, mouse over profiles, and the presentation profile is currently checked on. So any changes I make to my interface are going to be reflected in that. Let's make our interface great and let's set it up for success. So right now we have a good start. We have our functions split to the left and the right. Let's right click next to our functions to make sure that they're all visible. Yes, they are. And some of them are not in our side panels. A little tip for everybody, we actually have a panel at the bottom, which you guys might know about, called the markups list. But something that I didn't know until about a few months ago was that we actually have some of these functions down here. We have the 3D model tree and JavaScript console. So if you guys know some JavaScript and you want to enable some scripts in your program, it can be quite useful, especially for stamps. I'm actually going to demonstrate a stamp today that can save you guys a lot of time and allow you to really choose what kind of information you want to display very quickly. And the 3D model tree is great. It allows us to look at 3D PDFs. Certain programs can create them, such as AutoCAD or Revit. So it's really, really cool to use 3D PDFs. Anyway, let's now look at customizing our toolbar at the top, and we're missing a toolbar at the bottom of our screen. So we're going to be fixing that as well. One thing you can do is if you have existing tools at the top of our screen, which we do in this case, we can right-click next to any of them, and we can see a list of all the different toolbars right here. In the review profile, I actually was not able to do that because there weren't any tools at the top. I could do it on the right side, but I couldn't do it at the top because there were no tools there. So another reason why we switched to the Review Advanced profile to see the difference. So we can start to turn on these tools and experiment. I would say for most people, the most important tool groups to turn on are going to be the advanced and advanced text ones. Now notice that when I click on a tool group, it actually disappears. So that can be cumbersome if I'm trying to turn on and off certain tool groups very quickly. So instead of having to do one by one and having to right click about 10 times, we're going to go to a better place. We're going to go to the tools dropdown and mouse over toolbars. And now we can see not only those tool groups, we have 3 extra special tool groups right up here: the status bar, navigation bar, and properties bar. This is the next big thing that I urge you guys to turn on. I don't know why, but the status bar is turned off by default in Bluebeam Revu. I hopefully will submit a feature request and see if we can get that turned on. Maybe there's a reason why it's off. But I love the status bar and I'm going to turn it on. At the bottom of my screen, I have a new bar. I'm going to turn it off so that you guys can see it appear. So you can see the word ready on the bottom left, for example. So that is going to go away because I just turned it off. And there it is again. So the status bar is all the way down here at the bottom of my screen. Also, I'm having a little bit of a visual issue with my viewport here. Looks like all of these guys are hidden. So let me change something. I see. Has to do with my side panel. So there's another interesting tip. And let me actually move this. There we go. That's much better. So yeah, I was having a bit of a visual bug where my icons were being cut off, but how I fixed that was I actually clicked on this line here where my markups list is, and this allows me to stretch it up. But instead of doing that, I can just click on the line and it automatically hides itself and shows itself. So I just needed to reset that. That's a second way that we can open up the markups list instead of clicking on the 3 lines and 3 dots icon right here. Anyway, so let's turn on more toolbars because we do have the status bar open. I'm going to explain how the status bar works in just a second. Let me just give you guys the best toolbars to have on. So advanced and advanced text along with document and document management are great. This is now staying open as I turn them on, and you can see they're appearing at the top of the screen as I do that. Then edit is significantly important, of course, along with file. And luckily, Revu actually placed the edit toolbar next to file right up here. So it's in a great spot for us to use. We're going to be using these more often than the other ones from my workflow and from what I've learned. So let's go back to toolbars. We don't need font because that's already in properties, so we can leave that turned off. It also takes up a lot of space. We could put links on. It has some useful things. It only comes with 3 tools. So we can leave that on if we have the space for it. Order is quite useful if you want to put markups behind or in front of other markups. So bring to front, for example, and send to back of there, along with bring forward and send backward, which means that you can bring all the way to the front or all the way to the back, but you could also bring a markup in between other markups by just using bringing forward or send back, if you have many markups that are kind of on top of each other and you want them to display in a certain way. Let's go back to tools and toolbars. And I think that these are pretty good. We could turn on zoom as well, and that should be nice. Now, we have some issues with the toolbars. Not all of them are currently visible, and some of the tools in the toolbars are hidden. I can tell because if I look near the last toolbar here, there's a drop-down arrow, and then I can see these vertical dots here. You'll notice that vertical dots appear to the left of every single toolbar, and that allows me to basically grab these dots and then move the toolbar somewhere else. So I just moved this toolbar that was completely hidden. It happens to have our sketch to scale tools out of its hiding spot. We're going to do the same thing for these measurement tools right here as well. Now I have my measurement and sketch to scale tools on my second line. I have a little bit of space on the first and second line for extra things, but for now, these toolbars are really great. So don't worry about writing down what I just showed you guys. There will be a recording of this webinar so you can see all the tools that I recommend that you all try. And of course, experiment and see what these other tools do. I mean, there's some really cool ones. Digital signature might be useful. It has a couple of things like signing document, adding signature fields. So I'll put that right there. So those are the toolbars. Now let's go back to our status bar that I turned on from here. Before I do want to show you guys one thing that I just realized. I don't have a Save As button that's conveniently next to the Save button. And I can find it by going to File and Save As, but that's too many clicks. So let's customize our toolbar and put Save As right there and set Revu up for success. That is the title of this webinar, right? So we're going to go back to Tools and Toolbar, and then here we can click on Customize. And I'll explain how this works because it can look a little bit overwhelming at first. On the left side, we have categories. These are the possible functions within the program. So we're going to go to the file one, which was already open. And these are the possible commands under file. So everything here exists in the program. What we see on the left side under toolbar and items are the different functions that we have turned on in our profile. So for example, alignment, appearance, and control point are not turned on, and we don't want them on because we don't really need them right now. And so we can now see the same kinds of categories as we saw here under toolbar. So the categories is for the whole program, the toolbar is specifically for our profile. So we are going to go and click on file in the toolbar area. And now we can see the specific items that are found in file. File happens to be this group of tools here in the upper left. So we have new PDF and open PDFs and save and print, all the basic stuff. And here they are in that same list, new PDF, open and save. So if we wanted to, we could turn on Save All. That means that every single PDF or drawing that's currently open would be saved at the same time. I don't recommend doing this because it's good to see what document you're saving. So I'm a bit more manual when it comes to that, but you could turn that on if you wanted to. Now we're going to add Save As, which exists in the program but is not currently in the list. We're going to add it to the items area. So all we have to do is click on it here in commands, click on this arrow right here, and now we have Save As, and we can then use these blue arrows to move it all the way up in between Save and Print because Save All is turned off right now. And then when we're ready, we can click OK. Now, before I do, we also have a bit of customization we can do here where we can add separators and add blank lines in between functions in the same category. So you guys could do that if you want. I currently like to keep mine as condensed as possible, and I think that these vertical dividers do a good enough of a job to separate the different tools. So, but you can do it. So let's click OK. And there it is, a floppy disk with a pencil. That's how I like to call it. Don't worry, guys, I'm not that old or that young, but I remember what a floppy disk is. So now let's move on and learn about the status bar because we have our tools set the way we want them. So the status bar is down here, like I mentioned earlier, and we have the word ready here. This is a little bit vague because I don't really understand what that means. What am I ready for? And apparently what it means is that I have the pan tool selected and I'm ready to use it. A little bit vague. Let's click on the tool next to the pan tool, and I'm going to show you guys a bit of a workflow feature that's going to really help you to use Revu to your best when you start working in Revu. So before I switch to this feature, I want to show you what pan does. I can click with my left mouse onto the screen, and look, you can see my hand is grabbing the page, so to speak, and then I can move my mouse around and I can pan around the screen. This is the first and last time that I'm going to do that in this presentation because there's a better way. And the better way is that we use our middle mouse button. We know that we have to scroll wheel, and we can basically zoom out and in by rolling the wheel back and forth like this. But we can actually click onto the scroll wheel. It's a button. So we click it in, and then we can pan around. And those of you who are familiar with AutoCAD, Revit, CAD, and BIM programs, then you'll basically understand that this is a typical workflow for those programs. And in Revu, it's the same concept. So we're going to use that to pan around instead, leaving our middle mouse available for either an extra feature, or we can just click on markups, which is typically what it's used for, and to click in areas to create markups. Now let's switch to the select tool. Looks like our mouse. Now our cursor has changed. We no longer see the hand tool. And if I click with my left mouse, nothing seems to happen. But if I click and hold with my left mouse, I can actually make a selection box. So we now have a much better feature available to us on the left mouse. We don't need to use the left mouse to pan around because we have the middle mouse button, which is what I'm using right now. And then I can make this nice selection area, and I can select all of these markups very quickly. Now, there's two ways you can select. If you want to select things partially but still have them encapsulated, go from top right to bottom left. And so here, I'm going to demonstrate that on the radius markup right here. We were able to select it, but we only had a portion of it highlighted. Now, if I go from the top left to the bottom right, I must encapsulate everything fully. So let's test it on this length dimension here and on the area. There it is. So because I didn't have the area or the length dimension fully encapsulated, I only selected the dimensions that were fully encapsulated. This is very similar to crossing and window cursors and selections in AutoCAD. So if you guys are familiar with that, then you'll know. AutoCAD actually has a visual indicator for when you're doing either or. Bluebeam doesn't. That could be a nice feature request. Anyway, let's move on. So now the status bar is telling me something a little bit different. Select region containing markups. This is great because now I understand that I can do that with my left mouse button. And that's how the pointer function works. I wonder if I click on another function, if this is going to give me more instructions. And of course it will. Now I just clicked on the highlight tool right up here. And now it's telling us basically how to use the highlight tool. It's even more specific. It's telling us to hold down our left mouse button to highlight. Very smart. And every single function has its own set of instructions. So this is a great reason why the status bar could be used. Look at that. I even learned that holding shift will snap. I don't know what snap means. Let me draw a line. I can now draw a line in any direction, but if I hold shift, oh, that's cool. I can draw in 45-degree angles, horizontal, vertical. So basically I've activated what we like to call in the AEC community temporary ortho. Ortho is typically the snaps and the ability to draw in straight lines in AutoCAD, for example. And now we can do it here in Bluebeam Revu, and they even added 45-degree angle functionality. So that's all because I was holding shift. Now I'm not holding shift, and there you go. So I just learned something new because I was looking at the instructions for the line tool. So another great reason why the status bar is extremely important. Now let's look at these other buttons here in the status bar. We have show grid and snap to grid as our first two buttons. So of course I can turn that on. I now have these nice dots that get more dense as I zoom in and less dense as I zoom out of Revu. So here I just found a threshold where it's just got less dense, and there now we have twice as many dots in between the other ones. Once we zoom in a certain amount, that stops, of course. What's also really cool is I can snap to this grid. So if I use the line tool, which is a good example, I can draw from exactly this point here. I can even be next to it, and Revu knows that I'm closer to that one than the other ones. And then I can just draw to another point. So it's rather forgiving, and it allows us to quickly draw to certain points of interest. So that's how the grid works. Quite useful, but for now, I'm going to keep that off because it's a little bit too busy for my eyes. Next to that is snap to content. This allows us to take advantage of our vector lines and our smart data that came from these lines that were probably created in a CAD or BIM program. So how does it work? If I use the line tool, and if I mouse over any of these lines right here, you'll see that a little square appears. I could do it for the circles and the lines. Now this square happens to turn blue at certain instances. It happens to be blue at the midpoint of a line, the end point of a line, and wherever a line intersects, it's also going to be there. It also happens to be at the 4 quadrants of a circle, so up, down, left, and right. And this, when the square is blank or empty on the inside, that means that I'm activating what we like to call in the AEC industry a nearest snap. So we've got nearest, midpoint, endpoint, and intersection along with quadrant, if you guys are familiar with the AutoCAD snaps. So quite useful to have that turned on. I have it on almost all the time. You might want to turn it off if you're trying to draw a line close to a corner, but you don't quite want to be at the corner. You could also just zoom in as much as possible and get as close as you wanted to. But yeah, so I leave that on about 99% of the time. The next function I have the opposite situation with, snap to markup. I actually keep it off 99% of the time. Snap to markup is actually kind of cool. Could be useful if you're drawing markups and you want them to relate to each other and make them really clean and organized. So I have it turned on and I've activated the line tool. And as I move my cursor, you'll see that I have this guideline that keeps appearing anytime I move next to a markup. What it's doing is it's detecting other markups in relation to my cursor, and it wants me to draw in reference to them. This is great because if I wanted to draw exactly where this corner and this corner line up, I got it right there, and that's awesome. And if I want to draw to a corner of a markup, I can do that, and there's that square again. So now I can use the same snaps that we just talked about on portions of markups, such as any of these markups here. I can draw to the midpoint here, and then I can draw this one from that corner right there. So it's really nice to use the snap to markup tool when you need it, but when you don't need it, it kind of forces you to draw in certain areas and you can't really draw in between things properly. So most of the time, since I don't need to snap to markups most of the time, and I'm typically snapping to the content on the page or these lines here, I'm going to keep it off. Next to that, we have reuse markup tools. This is also a great way to set yourself up for success when you're using Bluebeam Revu. The reason why is because using this allows you to use a fast workflow. All you have to do is remember one little detail. The escape key in Bluebeam Revu is a great way to reset your status. So what does that mean? If I turn off reuse markup tools and I make a line, I have a bit of a problem. I can make one line and then my cursor immediately resets itself. And if I wanted to make a second line, I would have to go back to the line tool and click on it and then do the same thing over and over and over again. And I can do that kind of fast because I know where the line tool is, but that's very tedious. And it's taking me too long to just draw a large amount of lines in an area. I'm going to get rid of all these and show you guys a better way. I'm going to turn reuse markup tools on, and now I'm going to use the line tool. And after I draw a line, my cursor is still able to make another line and another line and another line and so on and so forth. And there we go. I can click and hold the left mouse button, or I can just click and let go. It seems like doing that can be a little buggy. So if you click and hold the left mouse button, it's a little bit more responsive when you do this. Anyway, I was just able to make a ton of lines and I didn't have to click on the line tool again. So I'm gonna select all these and get rid of them so we can have a nice empty space. This is why reuse markups tools is so important. And when I'm done creating lines, all I had to do was press the escape key. So I'll just do it one more time. 1, 2, 3, escape, and now I'm done. And so the escape key becomes your best friend. My left hand has been sitting on the keyboard the whole time, getting warm by my PC. So now I am going to get rid of these lines. And now you guys know why reuse markup tools is great. And if you get used to using the escape key to cancel out of commands, you'll be in more control and you'll have the ability to make lots of different objects quickly. This also applies to anything in your tool chest. So I'm going to double click on this tool to turn it back into drawing mode. That means I'm going to make a copy of the tool. And if I wanted to place several of these, a good example of this is if I wanted to place column designations, I can just click, 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 and I've got all of them right there. I didn't have to click on the tool in the tool chest again. And when I'm done, I press the escape key. So this is why reuse markup tools is really, really great. I'm going to show you guys some preferences soon that have to do with that. Let's go into the last button in the status bar, and that is synchronized views. Synchronized views is great. It allows us to look at two things at the same time, and our second view is going to move with the first one. There's a couple of options that we have. If we click on the drop down here, we can click on document or page. Let me show you the difference between the two. We're going to go to our thumbnails and we're going to look at a second page. And then if we wanted to duplicate the view, we have two ways. We could basically view it separately, or we can just split our screen. So I'm going to click on the split vertical button right here. We also have split horizontal. I have two screens now. I'm going to be moving this screen to the left. Let me go to the first page here. And I seem to be on the second page on this one. I can tell because I've clicked into this area, and on the bottom it says 2 of 6. So anytime I move on either view, the view that I'm not in is moving along with it. This is a great way to compare differences between two different drawings that are similar to each other. Page 2 and page 3 of this PDF set happen to be that scenario. So I'm actually going to make page 2 my left side and page 3 my right side. I just had to click on the first tab and then click on the page in the thumbnail and vice versa. So now I have these views, and if I wanted to, I could comb over the entire document and really hope that I don't miss any changes. There are the comparison and overlay tools, but that is for another webinar. So just so you guys know, you don't have to physically rely on yourselves for this. But I can look at two different things at the same time, and that's what matters. Let me test that by going to the last page in this PDF set. And so this page on the left did not change to the last page. It's unique from the last page. And this is important because now I'm going to switch it to synchronized document. The problem with synchronized document is that I'm viewing the same exact thing twice. It could be useful for some cases, but it doesn't really have a lot of flexibility. So anytime I switch to another file within the same PDF, that's the key, then it is going to show the same file. If I was looking at two different PDFs, then synchronized document would have a use, but in this case, it doesn't. So that's basically the difference. I typically use synchronized page almost more often than not, because in the same PDF set, I'm typically comparing two different things and not the same thing twice. And that's how you do it. And now you guys can see that I became a Bluebeam certified instructor officially in 2019. Anyway, let's close out of this and let's move on from the status bar. I think we understand how it works. It also has its own scale and page size similar to the navigation bar, which is above it. Quite useful, I guess. Now we can see it twice. And so let's move on and look at preferences. Make sure that all of our settings are correct. So we're going to go to the review dropdown and click on preferences. Here, we're going to start in the general tab, and under options, we can check and see that everything here is to our liking. For example, there happens to be another theme in review, the light theme. The dark one I think is more popular, and it's a little bit easier to see the icons in the dark one. The light theme is a little bit too bright, in my opinion. And then we can change a few things. Another thing that's cool is if we wanted to use Review as a web browser, we can open Homepage in Web tab on Startup. That's what this option is right here. So that's kind of cool. I could use Review and browse the internet very quickly in the same program without having to switch to another web browser like Chrome. Then I can go to navigation. What I've done is I've actually changed my sensitivity from 4, which is the default, to 2. This means that when I zoom in and out with my scroll wheel, I take less space as I zoom in and out. Zoom in as drastically or out as others will, so I can have a little bit more precision. So you guys can change this to 3 initially, and if you want to change it to 2 like I have, you can try that out as well. And then of course you can check your grid and snap settings. So here's where you can change the grid spacing, and you can make that grid customized to the way that you want. So if you need to use a grid, here it is. And then of course, check your spelling settings if you'd like. Moving on, we do have some interface settings, but most of these are pretty good. In our file access area, we can increase the amount of items in our recent area right here. Very convenient if we have a lot of files that we're cycling through on a day-to-day basis. Of course, you can just pin your files to categories in the file access tab to circumvent this, but could be useful if you have a lot of things pinned as well. Let's move on to tools. And here are two options that are going to really set Review up for success for everybody. Reuse tools, which we saw the button for down here. This is the setting that has it on by default when you open Review, so I have it turned on. And auto size text box and call out markups. This is going to save you guys time, and your drawings and your markups are going to be so clean that whoever works with you is going to say, thank you for not making the smallest text box fill the entire screen, and thank you for not allowing me to accidentally click on it, because that could be a little bit of a disaster, especially if you don't realize what you're doing. You could delete somebody else's markups without even knowing. So that's why we turn that on, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a second. Another thing you can do is you can go to your measure area, and here are settings for measurements, but not really. It turns out that these are the settings specifically for the dynamic fill function. This is a measurement tool that is so useful, I've demonstrated it in previous webinars. I don't think we'll have time for it today, but we're going to set some settings for it to make sure that it's working accordingly. So make sure that you set your DPI to as high as possible, as long as your PC can handle it. This will allow you to get more accurate fills. So I set mine to 400 DPI. The default is 300. You can change your fill size to 50%, fill speed to 30%, and boundary to 25. And I find these settings to be the best for me. The reason why is because the fill size allows you to fill smaller areas if you make it smaller. So if it's too big, then it'll be a little bit hard to click in between certain lines. So I make mine about 50%, and you can make it even smaller. The fill speed is at 20 by default, so we can make it a little bit faster, save us some time. If it's too fast, you won't really be able to keep track of what you're doing, so it's a little bit better to keep it in a medium speed. And I make the boundary size as small as possible. 25 is the smallest, and that allows me to make very accurate boundaries in small interior walls if I needed to. And then the rest of the settings are default. The green and the blue color, and the high sensitivity is great. Low sensitivity, I don't find it to work very well, but you can try it if you're having issues passing through certain lines. And the high one is the opposite. It will prevent you from passing through lines after a certain amount of time. And then the momentarily hide markups thing could be useful, but if you want to see your markups while using dynamic fill, you might want to turn that off, and that can make sure that you can see what you're doing while you're using dynamic fill. I'm going to turn it off, actually. And then we can go through some other settings, but most of them are pretty good. So if you wanted to know, just an FYI, you can go to the admin section, and here's where you can reset review. You can back up all of your settings. So once you're done setting review up, you never have to do it again. Just back it all up and you'll get your profile, your tools, and other settings that are not directly related to them, but they're part of review. So the backup is a great way to do it. And you can restore your backups right here. And that's basically our preferences in a nutshell. And you guys can explore more preferences and see what suits your workflow. I'm going to click OK, and there we go. Now, let's go back into our PowerPoint. I'm actually looking at it on my second screen, so you guys don't even know. And we're going to make sure that we have everything. We've talked about everything. I think it's time to look at the tool chest and get that set up for ourselves. So let's do that now. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to my profile because I don't have any special tools or my tools here. They're tied to my profile. I could show them in all profiles, but it makes it hard to export them and to save them. So instead, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to switch to my profile by going to the Review dropdown, clicking on Profiles, and here's my AR profile, Benti representing Review 20. By the way, speaking of which, Review 20.1 just came out last week, and the announcement was announced today. So Review has a nice update. You can access it by going to the Help dropdown and clicking on Check for Updates. I am up to date, and if I go to the Review dropdown and click on About, we can see my version. I'm not going to do that because my serial number is there, so I'll keep that private. Anyway, now I'm in my profile. Not a lot has changed, except that I do have every single tool turned on. You'll notice that Form turned itself off, so it tends to do that whenever you open the program. So I just turn it on if I ever need to use it. It's quite useful if you have Review Extreme, and that's probably why it turns itself off, because some people have Review CAD or Standard, and these functions are not available in Review CAD or Standard. Anyway, now I have my profile open, and I'm going to go to my tool chest. And now you're going to see why I switched to this profile. Here are my custom tools. I happen to group them on this page just so you guys can get a visual representation, but you don't need them to be on your PDF. You can just have them in your tool chest, open up a new PDF like I'm doing right now, and your tools are still going to be available to you. And you can use all of your tools there, such as here is my text box template. Now, notice what's going on right now. My mouse wheel seems to not be working. You guys can see that I'm scrolling on the right side of my screen. And so what happened is that I opened or created an 8.5 by 11. Oops, let me close my email. Sorry about that. I had an 8.5 by 11 file that I just created. So because of that, Review just switched my navigation scheme to what's called scrolling pages. It's found right down here. And so I'm going to switch out of that and go to one full page. Now I can see the entire page at once, and I can zoom in and out like I usually can. And I prefer to use one full page, but I just wanted to let you guys know that Review tries to simulate Microsoft Word in any page that's portrait. It wants to basically make it an 8.5 by 11 and then zoom it in like this and allow you to scroll down and up like this. Anyway, so like I was saying, I can use my tools on any page I want. So here I'm going to make a new text box. I'm going to type a little data. I made a very big box, if you guys noticed, but I just typed a little bit of data. I'm going to press the escape key. That box, luckily, just refit itself around my text. That is awesome. And the reason why I did that is because of the preference that we enabled right here, auto size text box and callout markups. So any text boxes, typewriters, callouts, if they have a border around them, actually typewriters don't, only text boxes and callouts, and the Cloud Plus tool has a callout, then it will fit around it automatically. Now, let's say that I'm working and I make the text box big after I make my text box. And now I have a bit of an issue. I could try to resize it if I wanted to and eyeball it, but there's no need to do that. Instead, while the text box is selected, like I mentioned earlier in the webinar, we have this new bar that appears below our regular functions. I'm going to deselect the markup so you can see it disappear. Now we just have these generic drop downs here where we can quickly we can insert a blank page, and we can also click here and see some properties about our document, such as the size of our document and who made it, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm going to click on this markup, and now we have the new bar again. And of course, what's exclusive to this bar is auto size text box and auto size text. Let me show you both of them. So I want the text box to fit around my text, so I'm just going to click on auto size text box, and I'm going to use this almost 100% of the time. The reason why is I'm going to make my box big again, and let's say that I wanted my text to fit inside of the box this time, the opposite scenario, because my box is perfect and I have some other reference objects around it, and I just want the text to fit it. So I can quickly do that by doing auto size text. This is pretty cool. There is a bit of an issue. Let me make the box a little bit bigger so I can fit that around. There we go. The issue with this is if I go to my properties and if I check the font of my text, it doesn't have a font size anymore. It's set to auto. What's cool is that I can uncheck auto and I can get my font size. Wow, it turns out that I actually made it to be perfect for font size 72. Usually when I do this, I'm going to try it again and see what happens. It will make the font size, there we go, some irregular random number with a bunch of decimals at the end. So it turns out that I got really lucky just now because 72 happens to be a very typical font found in word processing documents. Wow, man, I've got the magic touch. Look at that. So that's how those two functions work, and our tools can be used anywhere. So I'm going to get out of this PDF and go back to our other PDF. And so these are all of my custom tools. What I also did to make sure that I'm set up for success is I found objects on my page that I want to use over and over again, and I saved them to my tool chest. So if you get a document that has a certain machine or certain appliances or plumbing features, such as sinks or toilets, then you can basically make a snapshot of them and save them to your tool chest. How I did that was I can use the snapshot tool by either going to the edit dropdown and mousing over snapshot and clicking on it. There's the icon for it. So let's find that exact icon. There it is. Here it is in our set of tools at the top. So I can click on snapshot. And now I can go to any of the objects that I want, and I can basically make a nice box around them. So using the sink as an example, I can just make a nice box. I'm clicking and holding my left mouse button, letting go. And what I need to do immediately after, before I click or do anything else, is copy and paste what I've just made a snapshot of. So I'm going to do Control and C to copy it. And then I'm going to do Control and V, as in Victor, to paste. And there it is. My sink is now a markup that I can move around. I can rotate it so it can face this direction. And I can save it to my tool chest. Right click, add to tool chest, AR tools. And there it is. I now have a rotated version of this sink. I actually made the exact same one earlier. And there you go. So you can turn all the objects that you need into markups. This includes any image. So here is an image that I have used previously. I've already saved it to my tool chest. I can reuse it at this size if I wanted to, or I can click it and then I can basically resize it right here. And so that's how we can reuse any asset we want, get it ready in our tool chest so we don't have to worry about it in the future. Let me get rid of this sink because I already have it there. You can right click and delete just like that. And you can even save legends to your tool chest. Legends are quite interesting. You can take your markups and turn them into a legend, which is what I've done right here. We're not going to get into that with this webinar. That is for a whole nother webinar. But they're possible, and you can save them to your tool chest, and you can basically reuse them over and over again. So this one is actually a little bit different from the other one, and it superseded that. Isn't that cool? So you can only have one legend for each markup at a time on a page. I'll undo that. Anyway, so I've also saved my measurement tools here in my tool chest. I have some sequences that I've made. So let me show you guys another thing that you can do to set yourself up for success. You can create a sequence out of any markup. So if a markup has text in it and it has a certain letter or number, and you can do that in any order you want, or just numbers or just letters, whatever you want, you can turn it into a sequence. So I'm going to make one right now. what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the Tools drop-down, Markup, and I'm going to use the text box. I'm going to make a nice box, and we're going to call it A1. Or actually, let's do 1A to be different from the other ones that I've created. So 1A it is. And I want to have a nice circle around it, so I'm going to open up Properties. I'm going to go to the Shape area and turn on Circle. I want to make sure that my A and 1 are on the same line, so I'm going to make the circle a little bit bigger by dragging this grip, and then I'm going to auto-size the text box around it. Perfect, that's a lot better. So I'm ready to now use this as some kind of a column designation or other kinds of things on our pages. Surveyors would love this because then they can designate manholes and other items like that. So all I need to do is click on this, right click, and sequence. Let's see. Now, sequence is not here, and that's because this needs to be in my tool chest first. So let's right click, add to tool chest. And now in the tool chest, we're going to right click on this. There's sequence, and then we can define our sequence. Here is where we can change how the sequence is going to work. So we do want it to be numerical. We want the A to remain the same, and then we want the 1 to change. Or we could do the opposite, and we could have the 1 stay, and we can make the A change, so we could have 1A, 1B, 1C. So it all depends on what your preference is. Let's make it so that the number changes, so it'll be a little bit easier to keep track of. But you know what? Let's actually make it so that the letter changes so that we can be different from these other ones. So we're going to go to A, B, and C uppercase. Perfect. The prefix is always going to be the number 1. So that's going to come before whatever we want to change. And we want the A, B, and C to change, so that's perfect. We don't need a suffix because there's nothing after the A. We're going to start at the first unit. So even though it says start at 1, it just means start at A. And the increments are going to be at 1. So it'll go A, B, and C. If I made the increment 2, it would be A, C, and E. So we could do that if we wanted to skip letters. For numbers, it's actually more useful because then we can do even numbers, odd numbers, etc. Then we can reset the sequence per document if we wanted to. If we don't, then that would mean that we could reset it per page. What this means is that right now I'm working on this specific page, and if I wanted to make another sequence with this markup on another page, I can do that by selecting page instead of document. If I don't do that, then whatever sequence I make on the first page, if I use this exact tool on the second page, then the sequence would continue from what the first page was left off at. So if I left off at 9, it would then continue on to 10, 11, 12. So we actually wanted to reset per page to give us a bit more flexibility. Then the last option is so important. Renumber markups when deleted, or renumber when markups are deleted. That means that if I delete a markup in the middle of the sequence, it'll renumber itself. Let me demonstrate that right now. So now you can see in the tool chest, I have this new icon here. It shows a little arrow facing to the left. You can see that I have 2 other sequences in my tool chest. They have the gold color, and that allows me to reset them very quickly. Right now, this is gray because I haven't really made the sequence, so I can't really reset it yet. So let me show you what that means. I'm going to click on my sequence here in the tool chest. I'm going to click on the screen, and it turns out that this one that we made before making the sequence is not part of the sequence. And that's why it wasn't able to be reset. So because we just made the first one from the tool chest, the sequence began and the icon changed. So let's get rid of this one so we don't get confused. Let's go back to the tool chest and 1B, 1C, 1D. You'll notice that the circle got bigger because the letters actually got bigger. But then when the letter fits on the line, it makes the circle small again. So the auto-size text box is working, but for some of them, we have to fix that. So we could probably fix that by making the circle a little bit bigger manually to accommodate for the letters C and D, which happen to be really, really big. Anyway, we made our sequence, and that can continue on and on until the end of the alphabet. I'm assuming that if we go to Z, that it would basically give us a second letter, but I've never tested that theory. I'll let you guys test it and give me some feedback, and I'll test it after the webinar today. Anyway, there's our sequence, a little bit funky looking, but we just have to fix this a little bit, and boom. It would take us to a couple of clicks to fix all of these, but there is our sequence. And so that's how sequences work. You can get them set up and ready to go ahead of time so that you can set up review for success, make sure that your workflow is attended to, and you don't have to do things on the fly that waste time. And now I believe that we've gone over everything that's important. I just want to show you guys a little bit more about tools, and I do want to show off some of the other tools that you can find online. So one thing you can do is you can click on the gear wheel next to your tool group, and this is where you can save tools. You can associate a scale with your tools. Right now, mine are set to 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. I can tell because I have this icon right here next to them. And this is where I can export my tools. This is a much faster way to export them as well. So if I want to share them with someone, first I need to save them because I made a change to the tools chest. And now it's a .btx file instead of the profile, which is .bpx file. So they're both small files. Put them on a USB drive, send them to yourselves on an email, and you'll be good to go. Now let's go to the tool chest dropdown. Here's a list of all the different tools that I have, and I can turn them on and off quickly here. If I go to manage tool sets, I have a bit more control. I can now reorder my tools. So I made sure to put mine at the top, and my tools, which is the default tool group, I turned it off and put it at the bottom because I don't really use it. And now I can see all the different tool groups that I have. And if I wanted to, I could even go and customize those. Now, let me show you guys what it is like to, give me 1 second. Something, a little bug is happening. I'm getting a little bit of a flashing error. Give me 1 second. Okay, so there we go. It seems to have resolved itself. I think it was just visual on my end. Anyway, so you can take your tools and you can share them with each other, and then you can basically import them and export them. You can make new tool groups. Let me show you all of the different tool groups that I have. So here's my main tool group. Below that, we have recents. I also have some basic stamps, so I can quickly put a check mark on my page if I wanted to. I can make that bigger if I need to, but right now it's made for 8.5 by 11 pages. And I have some proofreading symbols that I could use, different design symbols, windows, electrical tool sets. I've got HVAC and plumbing here, even CCTV and people. Let me show you the people. They look pretty cool. They are right here. So I've got all of these different people, whether it's in plan view or in elevation views. Quite useful if I wanted to simulate some stuff and designate some pathways, for example. I even have punch key plans. So there's a lot of different tools that you can find online on Revu's website, and of course on the forums for Bluebeam Revu. And with that, I believe that concludes our presentation. So I believe we're ready for questions. Does anyone have any questions?
All right, Ari, thanks for that great presentation. Looks like we do have a couple questions. First question we have, can I install Bluebeam Revu on more than one computer?
So you cannot, but it depends on the amount of licenses that you have associated with your, or the amount of seats that you have that are associated with your license. If you buy one license of Bluebeam Revu and one seat is in that license, then what you need to do is you need to go to the review dropdown and click on unregister in order to unregister whatever PC you're not going to be using. And then you would have to click on register, which is in the same area, but it just changes its name to register if you're not registered. And then you'd have to register it on that PC. So you can only use Revu on one PC at a time if you only have one seat associated with your serial number. If you have multiple seats, then you can, of course, install it on multiple PCs up to whatever limit you have. So we have some clients that have 10 seats, 20 seats, or more. So good question.
Okay, next question we have, can you demonstrate scale functions, please?
Yes. So the scale can be set by going to the measurements panel. And we have two different ways we can do it. We can calibrate and set a custom scale, and we can use an existing measurement to determine that scale. Or we can click on preset right here and choose from this drop-down list. And we have all of these different typical scales that we can click on and use. So that's why I'm using 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. When I first used this drawing, I didn't see the scale on it, so I had to determine what it was. So I clicked on calibrate. I need to select 2 points of a known dimension, very easy. So I'm going to use this dimension in between grid lines 5 and 6. Let me zoom in on this intersection so I can get it right there. And I'm going to zoom in and get that intersection right there. Now Revu is asking me what is supposed to be this dimension right here. It's not telling me that it's 1 foot, it's just asking me what it is. So I'm going to tell it that it's 30 feet with the apostrophe symbol. And the number on the left side will change. Right now it didn't change because I've already done this several times, but it'll change to accommodate whatever number you type here. Then I can change my precision if I want to. So I prefer 1/16 of an inch. Some people like to have it a little smaller or larger. And then you can apply your scale to either all the pages in your set or just the current page. So I'm just going to do it to this page. Now I'm done, so I'm going to click on Apply Scale. Now the scale has been applied and all of my measurements are now allowed to be used. You cannot use measurements until you set a scale. So my scale is ready to go, and it turns out that 30 feet equals 3.75 inches. Now that's a bit of an odd scale, so it's not quite uniform. And if I do the math correctly, I think I would have to divide 30 by 30 to get 1 foot. Therefore, 1/8 of an inch equals 1 foot is the same as 30 feet equals 3.75 inches. And that's why I used the preset scale and I changed it back to 1/8. once I use the calibration and I did the math, I can determine a typical scale that fits this page. And so that's basically how scales work. And I think we'll go into more detail about measurements into another webinar, but good question.
Great. Next question. Is there a way to change your key bindings?
Yes, good question. And this is actually a great way to set yourself up for success. One thing that's odd about Revu, for example, is that in order to grab more than one markup, you could use a selection, but if I just wanted to select this one afterwards, I would have to hold the shift key. And typically we use the control key to select individual markups and group them, and the shift key is used to grab multiple things in a sequence, such as when you're in a folder in Windows and you want to select more than one file. So what you can do is you can change that by going to the View dropdown and clicking on Keyboard Shortcuts. Here's a list of all of the different tool shortcuts, and then up here you can switch to commands as well. So the tools have to do with, the cloud and text boxes and things like that, and the commands have to do with saving, copying, and of course using the shift key to select multiple markups. So you can change them. All you have to do is select any of these shortcuts. Let's do paste, for example. Looks like paste is a special one. It's reserved. Interesting. But it looks like paint is not. So we have the format painter, and then we have this paint tool. That's interesting. I thought they were the same thing. Oh, I learned something new. So what I can do is if it doesn't exist yet, if there's no shortcut for it, I can then type in a shortcut here and click on add. Or if it already has a shortcut associated with it, I can replace the text in here and then click on reassign. And that's how keyboard shortcuts work. And then of course you can import and export your specific keybinds that you set in Revu if you did it already on another PC. So you don't have to do this again. And that's how they work.
All right. Next one. Is there a limit to the amount of documents I can upload to Studio?
Yes and no. Good question. So how it works is I actually have a web browser prepared for this because I've done this before, right? Let me show you guys a quick comparison of Studio projects and Studio sessions. Studio, for those of you who don't know, is a cloud-based system within Revu. By the way, you can find it by clicking on the Studio button right here. And there are basically no limitations to using Studio projects. Studio projects is a check-in, check-out system that is really good for archiving our files and retrieving them when we need them, not necessarily for working on them when they're current projects. That's where Studio Sessions shines. Anyway, projects basically has no limits here. And the only difference is that you can't really use the markup alerts thing. And if you have a client that doesn't have a license of Bluebeam Revu, and you still want to allow them to work with you, they cannot use projects. They'll need to use sessions. So to create a project or session, you'll need a license. But if you want to join somebody else's session, you don't necessarily need a license. It's a great way to introduce people to the program and allow them to see what it's like to use Revu, especially when you're drawing on the same PDF at the same time with Studio Sessions. So Studio Sessions does have some limits. You have a limit of 500 people, which is quite a lot. 5,000 files, which is, I think, a little bit bigger than typical projects of hundreds of files. And we have some limits here, but they're pretty exaggerated, so you're probably not going to hit these limits. But there are limits because some people might abuse them. So, but yeah, these are the differences, and there's basically no limits for projects and a few minor limits for sessions that don't really come into play. And let's get back to our PowerPoint. There we go.
All right. And seems like the last question. Can I create a template and use it when I need to use the same markups on other drawings?
Yes, but not necessarily, you don't necessarily need to do that. What you could do is kind of like I've done, and I've basically placed all of my markups that I like to use on a sheet, and I could use this sheet as a guide, and I use this for training. So those of you who have trained with me probably have some memories of this sheet. Now, instead of doing that, my template could be considered the tool chest. I've placed all of these markups in the tool chest, and that way I don't really need to have a page of a template. Like I told you guys earlier, I can just make a brand new page or look at other PDFs, and I can use these exact tools on those PDFs. So my tool chest, you could say, is my template, and there's no need for a template like in AutoCAD or in Revit, where they have special file designations for those templates. And those are actually quite sophisticated, but with Revu, there's no need. You can just customize a PDF the way you want it to. A good example might be one of the training PDFs that I created. Let's see, I believe it's this one. And so this is actually a decent template if I needed to give this to somebody and I wanted it to be in a certain way. And I just made this for training purposes. Ooh, there we go. My PC just flashed a few colors. Anyway, so our templates are basically our tool chest and our profile. So that's a good question, though.
All right, seems to be that's all the questions.
All right.
So if we can go to the last slide. Thank you again for attending our Bluebeam webinar, setting up Bluebeam Revu for success. Before you leave, please remember our blog is live. You can check it out on our website. Bluebeam training is available. If you're interested in that, please make sure to contact us. If you're interested in more webinars or other events, you can also go to our website and click the events tab and sign up for them. And please feel free to email us at info@ddscad.com if you need any other information or have any questions. Thanks again.
Take care, everybody.